When I was in 8th grade, my mother bought an old house with an inheritance from her mother. We had to do a lot of repairs before moving in, and my grandfather helped until his sudden death. The last time we saw him was for my birthday dinner. 5 days later, my mother found him dead in his home, on her birthday. Poltergeist and paranormal activity started becoming more and more common from this point. It started with my bedroom door. The house was kind of unlevel, so I used an area rug to hold my bedroom door open when I wanted it. I saw this rug move across the floor to allow my door to close on many occasions. Sometimes it would slam. This house was originally constructed as government housing for Native American families. My bedroom was the original house, one small room. The rest was built on bit by bit, hence the unlevel floors. The kitchen was always a creepy place. There was usually some kind of small, cloudy figure looming outside of my mother's bedroom, just off the kitchen. I had to walk through the kitchen to get to the bathroom. Often, I would feel something brush by me, or hear footsteps behind me, to and from the bathroom. One night, my mother was home alone, working on a job in the kitchen. She was seated at a desk, next to the doorway from the living room to the kitchen. Something turned the stereo on, and turned the music up very loudly. My mother turned it down and went back to working. Then the music went very quiet. Again, she adjusted the volume. The next time she glanced over at the stereo, it was just in time to see the volume dial turning. She freaked out at this point, turned off the stereo, and quietly tried to work until I returned home. She told me about it, and I could see the fear in her face. She isn't a dramatic person. We talked about what I had experienced and realised that much of it was the same. She had seen my door close on its own after the rug had slid itself away. Things are always weird, but the scariest thing was on my last night at the house. I had graduated from high school and was moving to the East Coast. We'd packed all my stuff and loaded it for the drive. I cried a lot and we had a family dinner. My boyfriend was spending the night so that he could see me off in the morning. We were both in my room about to go to bed. I switched off the light and a very bright light went on in the corner above me. I turned the switch back on and saw my boyfriend. His face was white and he looked like he had tears in his eyes. "What the hell was that?" "You saw it too?" I said. "It was light in all 4 corners, over your head and over there," he said, shakily pointing at all the other upper corners of the room. I never went back to that house, and my mother moved the same year. She's had more experiences, but it was less frequent after I left. That final goodbye was enough to last me a lifetime. When we brought my daughter home from the hospital, my son was 4 years old. The labour and delivery was much less stressful than my first. My daughter also slept very well through the night, for the most part, and I remember thinking that I deserved this after the hundreds of sleepless nights I spent with my son. Everything was very blissful, until my daughter was about 4 weeks old. Things started changing in the house. Lights would turn on and off sporadically. The TVs would flip on and then off. Things would go missing. Much of this I put off as coincidence or simple mishaps. However, things soon took a turn for the worse. The atmosphere of the house turned into that of an angry one. I would hear banging and slamming going on, and when I tried to locate where it was coming from, I could never find it. My son was in the bathroom once, and as soon as he walked away from the toilet, a heavy glass light fixture came crashing down, barely missing him. We would hear crying and meowing sounds coming from the basement, only to investigate and never find anything. All of the children's toys would make their sounds at odd hours of the night. I remember one night hardly sleeping, because the toys would take turns going off. First off the electric drums, then a toy fire engine, and then a doll who would continually say, "Pick me up, Mummy, pick me up, Mummy." That night, I threw all of the toys out on the driveway and ended up throwing them all away because it freaked me out so much. One rainy day, my son, baby daughter and I were in the southwest bedroom. I was reading books to them, when all of a sudden we heard the worst sound I have ever heard in my life. It sounded as if 1,000,000 pieces of glass shattered inside the walls of the bedroom. It was a shrieking, shrilling sound, and my son looked at me and said, "Mummy, let's leave this house." We did leave the house that afternoon, but didn't return. A person I know who is very spiritual came into the house and went through every room, and her and I prayed. We also told the spirit or entity to please leave the house and leave us alone. Gradually things started getting better, and the angry feeling has left. I've always thought that this was probably a poltergeist haunting. One of my first experiences with the paranormal began quite innocuously. I'd just moved in with my fiancée to a 4-plex, 2-story apartment. She had a son from a previous marriage that I would later adopt and raise as my own, who was about 2 years old at the time. We'd been living in the apartment for about a month when the first strange thing happened. You see, we always kept the salt and pepper shakers on the top of the stove, and one day they went missing. We searched all over and under, but couldn't find these shakers. As most people would, we just chalked it up to forgetfulness and figured they would show up eventually. Well, they did. About a month later, and my fiancée came out of the kitchen, asking, "Where did you find the salt and pepper shakers?" "I didn't," I replied, and she proceeded to show me that the aforementioned shakers were mysteriously back on top of the stove, where they were normally kept, with the exception of the last 30 days. Needless to say, we were both a little stunned, and couldn't find any rational explanation for this, other than that one of us was lying. Later that night as I was watching TV, my fiancée was doing the dishes. She came out of the kitchen with a look of shock and fear on her face, and said, "You're not going to believe what just happened." You see, the cupboard doors above the sink are spring-loaded, and if opened, will slam shut. As she was cleaning up, the doors above the sink opened and closed, slowly. Something that couldn't happen unless someone or something was guiding them. I've known about the paranormal prior to meeting her, and knew that what we had was a poltergeist. Another month went by with nothing out of the ordinary. Then the strangest thing happened. You see, both me and my fiancée work at the same company. We leave together in the morning, drive in the same car, and come home together. No one else had access to our apartment. This day was no different. We left for work, locked the door, and when we came back home, we were greeted by a pretty amazing sight. The furniture in the house was completely rearranged. The sofa was on the other side of the room. The end table was in the centre of the room. The TV was in the dining room. Almost every piece of furniture on the lower level had been moved. Why would anyone break in just to rearrange the furniture, I thought? Nothing was taken, just moved. After I returned everything to its proper location, we had no further occurrences for another month. It was at this time that I was beginning to notice a pattern. Each strange event was happening on the same exact day of every month. The following month, I stayed awake listening to the sliding door in the lower level slide open and shut. At first, thinking it was a burglar, I grabbed my trusty 9-iron that I kept under the bed for such a purpose. Slowly and nervously, I proceeded down the stairs. I looked around, and not only was nobody in the house, but the metal bar that I keep in the track of the sliding door was still in place. Things like this kept happening on the same day each month. Nothing seemed malevolent, it just seemed to be a trickster. Then one month, as I lay awake in bed listening once again to the sound of doors opening and closing, I see a light from under my bedroom door, slowly fading in and out. There were no dimmer switches in the house, and yet this light was not just snapping on and off, it was fading in and out. In my youth, I was not as fearless as I am today. 9-iron or not, I wasn't going to open that door and investigate the strange light. If it happened today, I would grab my trusty K2 and digital recorder, and I would have run out that door looking for evidence. Eventually we moved, and whatever it was that was haunting us stayed within the house. We had no further problems at our new house. Normally, it's theorized that poltergeist is either caused by an individual or attached to an individual. The only thing I can think of is that because it was an apartment located in a fourplex, one of the people in the other apartments might have been the cause. As I said before, this wasn't my first experience with the paranormal, but one of the more interesting ones, and probably contributed to a large degree in my becoming a paranormal investigator today. I only wish that I had the guts back then to open that door and investigate. I am an 18-year-old male, and I live on the Gold Coast of Australia. This is something that happened only recently in my current house. My parents and sister were out on the sofa playing Uno, while I was watching TV in my room, when I heard a massive thud on the bedroom window. Now at the time my curtains were shut, and it took a little courage to get up and move them to see what was outside. Being a little freaked out, I ended up sleeping on the couch, where it was a bit less spooky at the time. I told my parents, but they swore they didn't hear a thing. 2 nights later, it was a Friday, and around 5:30. My parents were out at a barbecue, and my sister was at her friend's place across the road for a sleepover, while I was up listening to music and working on assignments. Suddenly, I turned my head to the side door, just about 3 meters away from where I was sitting, to see a tall, dark, faded-like man move across the porch. Before I could get a better look, it was gone. Later that same night, I was reading a comic in bed, when all of a sudden my sock drawer flew out onto the floor and made a real mess of itself. And then, 2 really fast knocks came on my closet. It freaked me out at the time because I thought someone might have been in there ready to attack me. So I ran out of the room, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and slowly crept back to my bedroom. I opened my closet door to find 3 of my shirts dangling as if somebody had just knocked them off the hangers. That night, I slept on the couch again. Nothing further happened, though I was just really stressed and scared. The next morning, I awoke to find a broken guitar string on my guitar. My trouser drawer was halfway opened, and for some strange reason, both my doorknobs had been twisted off and were laid out nicely on the floor next to each other. I told Mum and Dad about my situation, and they thought I was turning weird. The next couple of weeks before I would fall asleep, I could hear my name being whispered, like it was rotating around my head. It would get faster and faster, and then slowly fade out after a few minutes of confusion. I'd then hear my guitar being strummed, and more knocks on the window, except this time they would be more violent. For some reason the bangs on the closet had stopped. I had a mate to stay over a few months later. We set up a blow-up mattress on the floor for him, and we were just planning what to do the next day before we went to sleep, when all of a sudden the guitar started strumming again, and my stuffed animals on top of the wardrobe all collapsed off and onto the floor. Then, knocks on the door, and half of the carpet flew up, which was extremely frightening considering there is no fan or breeze in my house. Me and my mate ended up getting picked up by his mum late that night, as we were both extremely scared. I told Mum the next day, and it seemed like she was slowly starting to believe me. She slept in my room that night, and I slept on the couch. She awoke to say that she had found nothing out of the ordinary, so imagine my surprise when I went to bed that night to find myself being aggressively pulled by my foot. I jumped out of bed, scared to death, and my guitar started playing again. And this time, my underwear drawer flew open. It landed perfectly on the floor, not making any mess. These things are still happening to me on and off, and they only seem to be getting worse. Hi guys, thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got a paranormal experience or even a creepy experience with the living, and you want to share it with the channel, please feel free to email it to me. I love reading any submissions I get, and I do try and use as many as possible in my videos. Please remember to like, share, comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. It really helps, and it always puts a smile on my face to see those numbers going up. I will be back on Monday for another creepy video. I will be back on Tuesday for another creepy video. So enjoy your weekend, and until next time, sleep tight.